I'm Farley Thomas, the co-founder and CEO of Manageable, which is a small but fast-growing tech-enabled startup that's very much focused on improving business outcomes through people. And that takes us very quickly to how do managers behave day to day. And so we're in the business of improving the quality of managers day to day. So that's what Manageable does. In terms, very briefly, of how I got into that, maybe slightly weird business that we run.
Well, I was about to ask you that next question. I was going why have you decided to do this to yourself?
Yeah. Well, funny enough, I've started two businesses. One, some would probably be unkind and say, well, that was just a lifestyle business where you were selling your time, Farley. And that was business one.
Mm-hmm.
That was actually very enjoyable, I must say. But the second business that to your question on, why have I done that to myself? I actually wouldn't lightly recommend anyone starting up a company, just as an aside, because you really have to be all in. And it's, all the odds and the odds you haven't even thought of are stacked against you. But in terms of, I guess the intent behind your question, Dom, funnily enough, through a circuitous route, which I won't go into, I became quite bothered about what seems like a big injustice in the world of work, where we've got, by all counts, 150 odd million managers lurking in the world of work, according to Gallup, who I think have just taken number of employees and divided by some random number. And almost all of them have had no training.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing, arguably, the most important leadership job in the organization, which is taking responsibility for motivating, influencing other human beings, commonly known as the team. And so the injustice is they're not trained, they're not really set up for success. And by and large, are also expected to do the job they were doing before they took on this side hustle in team leadership. So I got quite bothered about this flagrant this really massive problem. And I have always had a bit of an entrepreneurial kind of gene running through me, despite quite a lot of time in a big corporate. And it suddenly just grabbed me. This is a huge global problem. It's the pandemic nobody's talking about. And it wreaks havoc, not just on employees, because if you think about it, somewhere in your home, Dom, and certainly in my home, there are a few employees lurking, people that go to work and come home with all of the stuff that goes on at work.
Yeah.
And managers have this ability to help you feel brilliant or spread misery. And the difference, I think, is just upskill them, give them the skills to do a great job of leading human beings. So anyway, that obsession with managers and the injustice got me into Manageable, Dom.
Do you know what? It's interesting coincidence. This morning, I was doing one of a series of interviews with the team for a manager that I'm coaching. And this employee said to me this morning, she said, my next call after this one is to resign. And went on to tell me why that she was going. And it had everything to do with the manager and nothing to do with the company. People join companies and leave managers. And, just it had made her miserable enough that she said that she decided to go do something else. And so, was very happy to be really clear about what this manager could do differently in the future. But it's just, lots of times people don't want to be managers and they're managers. I see that all the time, particularly in fast growing companies. We need a manager. So you look around and you go, oh, well, you've been here for a long time. We'll make you it. We'll have a client, fast growing business, and I'll say, right, leadership team, there's 15 people on the leadership team. Right, because nobody's ever got bounced off the team. The team only ever gets bigger. And so there's, but, you're right. The whole, you go home on a Friday, are you looking forward to, is that a happy time or a sad time? And on a Sunday evening when you're thinking about the next day, are you happy or sad? It has a massive impact outside of work and in work.
I couldn't agree more. ESG is a thing, isn't it? Environment, social, and governance. Lots of firms talk about ESG and do all sorts of brilliant things when it comes to the S. You know, they might do charity work, they might plant trees, they might do this, they might do that. all, you know, fantastic and well-intentioned and important stuff. But whenever I'm confronted by a CEO telling me about their initiative around S or the environment, I kind of say, you know, there's one very, very obvious thing you could do that will impact society really sharpish. Upskill your managers. And it's met with some kind of confusion. I said, well, if you've got 130 million managers, they're managing billions of employees. So if you can get those billions of employees feeling better, they're going to be spreading less stress and they're going to be doing more work, better work.
Yeah.
And it's a win-win. So yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, Dom, that, you know, that, as you say, people join great brands and leave bad bosses.
Yeah. And I've just been chatting to Matt Phelan from the Happiness Index, and he said, look, his data is irrefutable. Happy people who are happy at work do better work. And he said, he was quoting a study in the NHS, which shows that the death rate in hospitals with the unhappiest nurses is high single digits worse than the same it's in the NHS. This, like, everything's the same except the happiness of the nursing staff or the hospital staff, you know, and it's, you know, high single digits death rate higher. It's the only thing, the happiness. So it's huge, absolutely huge.
Yeah, and you could
it's good work. It's good work you're doing.
Thank you, Dom. Yeah. We've still got to conquer the world of managers and change it up. But we're on a roll.
So what's the difference between managers and leaders then? Because you've talked about managers here and not leaders.
Well,
what's your...
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I think there was a time when leaders and leadership wasn't a thing in the world of work. It's a bit like there was a time when KPIs and OKRs and goals weren't a thing. And I don't think you need to go back that far. I think, you know, in the 80s, there weren't, my understanding is, some things that we take for granted just weren't a thing at all. And on leaders versus managers, I mean, let me start with the once gold standard in education for leaders, Dom. It's the masters in not leadership, not management, but business administration, the MBA. You know, it does what it says on the tin, I think. So if at some point when that was concocted, the focus was on administering the company, administering the business, I think that sets us up for my argument, which is that leaders, as we think of them today, actually spend a ton of their time not leading the people in their organization, but administering the company, managing stakeholders, looking outwards, and doing all sorts of very, very important critical tasks, including possibly developing the strategy. But they get a ton of help, obviously, from strategy consultants and whatnot. So if we leave the labels aside for a moment, Dom, and think about, right, what does, for example, the CEO do every day? Well, they're not really hanging out with the core of the employees in their organization every day. No. Clearly nobody is. But if you get all of the line managers together, they really are. They are in almost all the conversations. They are leading the day-to-day work of their teams, and they're definitely not administering the organization, whereas the leaders are. So in a funny odd way, I would be tempted to flip the labels around and call the most senior people managers of the company. And all these managers that are neglected, to my earlier point about them not being given the skills, they are doing the day-to-day work of leadership throughout the organization. And so suddenly you see leadership development through a completely different lens.
Yes.
You would start with pre-managers and new managers and middle managers, if that's your terminology. And you'd make sure that at every step of the way, they've got leadership skills, because that's the core of their job. they're not deciding what company to buy. They're not deciding strategy. They're not deciding how to get funded. They're not deciding any of these kind of corporate transactional items, which don't require very much interaction with the bulk of the organization. So to your point, Dom, on this point about leaders versus managers, I hope I'm not coming across as cute for the sake of it or pedantic. I think this confusion is super important because it is the only thing I can put my hand on as an explanation for why leaders and leadership is heavily invested in. They get a lot of investment, and managers don't. But if the idea is to do leadership development, you really ought to be putting all your chips, all your bets on earlier career managers, because that's where the leadership is happening. And things like the MBA are probably perfectly suited for these people who are administering the company. But it's got so confused now that senior managers get a lot of help once it's too late. And I've been there. When I was a first-time manager, it was almost like I was born to be a genius at it. And by the time I became an MD at HSBC, it was almost like people couldn't fall over themselves to shower me with anything and everything. And I actually sometimes laugh about it, thinking, gosh, it's funny that they paid for people to distract me from my role. Because by then I didn't need, all my sort of day-to-day management days were way behind me. But it's a rich topic, Dom, that I can go on about forever. But that's my take on leaders and managers.
Do you have a core curriculum for managers? I just thinking about the challenges that many of our clients have and the things that people are untrained or find difficult, having a difficult conversation with people, right? So where there is a performance which is not what they would like, then having a conversation around what performance should be, and then having a conversation to try and get the employee to change in some way they find challenging and difficult, so avoid. And then hiring, right? If you've got a team and you're responsible for hiring the people on your team, I mean, they might have had no training in management, but they've had even less in recruitment. And then all of a sudden they get to have to pick somebody new on their team. And the research says in the UK, they get it right about 1 in 4. And then to my earlier point, the thing is that what happens is one of them is obviously a dud, so they get rid of them. But 12 months later, they've kept 2 people who they shouldn't have hired in the first place and probably should have got rid of, but haven't. And so they just drive down this just massive ballooning of mediocrity as a result of having this sort of untrained group of people managing the front line of these organizations.
Hiring well is a huge thing in itself. On your question about the curriculum, Dom, we double down on coaching skills for managers. And there's a ton of evidence that a coaching style of leadership massively boosts well-being and performance. And those are the 2 things most organizations want for their employees and for their shareholders. Well-being for employees and performance for everybody. And you can have them both. If you change the way in which people are led. And that means managers learning a new language, basically. They need to go to coaching language school and talk that new language more and more fluently through more and more practice and positive encouragement, positive feedback. So that's something we specialize in. And then for new managers, maybe closer to your original question, one other thing that we perhaps are distinct for doing is we've developed 30-odd modules, skills or knowledge modules, if you like, that we believe all managers should be well versed in. However, most training companies offer a course, which suggests everybody goes through the course. So far, so obvious. However, in our experience, bits of the course might have been covered last year. Bits of the course might have been covered just last week because somebody had something else going on within the organization. So what we've done is essentially bring all of those modules to the organization, and we co-create a course that is meeting the organization and the learners where they are, where they feel they need to be. And that's quite distinctive. So if you like, it's adaptive programs adapted to the organization, but it's not blank sheet of paper, because we believe it's a bit disingenuous to say we'll create something from scratch, because 80% of most of these topics just needs to be covered off in roughly the same way. And we try to do it in a way that is really engaging, that is memorable, that's fun, but also crucially based on the latest science, not just, oh, I drew this slide 10 years ago and it still seems to be okay, so let's just keep using it. We've got this kind of big focus on coaching skills, and we do that in a very distinct way. And then we've got this modular approach to building high quality but very relevant structured programs for learners within companies, entirely based on their context, not what we think they should do.
And how do you, what's your unique way of delivering that coaching training?
Yeah, good question, Dom. I mean, as I think about it, it feels again like that point about leaders and managers, blindingly obvious once I sort of mention it. But if you wanted to play guitar, Dom, I don't know if you probably already do.
No, I don't. No.
Anything musical?
Nothing. Zero.
Sport? Anything sporty?
Yeah, sporty. My latest thing is wake surfing.
Okay, that's good enough for me. Wake surfing. Perfect. Now, Dom, do you read big books on wake surfing and then you know about wake surfing? Or do you actually have to get on presumably a surfboard and then do lots of practice, right? And
yes.
So here's the funny thing that I've experienced firsthand, and no doubt everyone listening will have done. Weirdly, at work, all this common sense goes out the window. So if there's any behavior that you're supposed to exhibit, what happens is you get some e-learning.
Yep.
Or you get a lecture, or you get mandatory training where people are furiously ticking boxes to say that they've gone through it. And now you know about the behavior, but you're not supported in practicing it. And you're not necessarily ever doing it for real. And, so you're not given a path to get on that surfboard. And initially, maybe the waves are not so big. And maybe there's an expert on hand. And then gradually, as your confidence and your competence builds, maybe you can just kind of cut you loose and maybe give you a real ocean and a real huge wave, and you're going to be okay. So I promise you, Dom, that in 2016, Harvard, I think, studied the global world of corporate training, perhaps ironically, and concluded that what was happening was the great training robbery.
Right.
Because most of it doesn't work. And that's not according to me. It's according to some illustrious academics at Harvard who studied the $400 billion global training market. And their conclusion was most of it is not fit for purpose. Most of it actually is just anti-profit and anti-productivity, because you don't get the thing that you're paying for as a result of your time and money.
Well, it's interesting because I've spent most of my time saying that there's only one sensible way to describe most of the training that people go on, which is that it makes them feel less shit about their inadequacy, but it doesn't actually solve any of them. Their performance doesn't change at all. But the trainer turns up and says, this thing is really complicated, so the fact you're not very good at it is normal. Yeah. And And so at least they feel less shit about themselves afterwards. But the rest of it, you're right. You don't learn to ride a bike by reading a book. You have to get on the bike.
No. And actually, it's the wrong way round. As you get better and better at riding the bike, you actually could get some value from just reading some technical books about aerodynamics or cadence and blah, blah, blah. But if you're starting off, you really need to get on the bike.
I've got one down here that fits that category. North Sails Advanced Racing Tactics. Like if you're just jumping into a dinghy, that book is not remotely helpful.
Well, actually, it's dangerous, isn't it? You might start doing that stuff and get killed. Right? I think we just let the sail go this morning because it's not that windy. And it's like, what?
Yeah.
So building on your point, you just used a really crucial word in which is the trainer. And to go back to your question on what is it that we're doing that's distinct, that actually, we're quite proud of, but sadly, I genuinely don't think it's rocket science. I've got a language science background. My academic background is linguistics. And it sort of struck us as we were setting Manageable up when we had a bit of time on our hands in 2020. It struck us, my co-founder Inken and I, that if we could recreate the conditions that support language acquisition in the workplace, we could drop any behavior into that setup and managers will emerge with a fighting chance of actually exhibiting this behavior. So we drew the line between language learning and workplace coaching skills training. And so we built the coaching skills program respecting 5 principles. First of all, you've got to have data at the outset to know what you should be focusing on and getting better at. And so it is with language school. You don't just get dropped into any old class. People assess you. And, in my case, I went into the beginner's German class, not the advanced, because I knew no German. And there are no doubt bits of the language that you particularly need to focus on because that's your Achilles heel. So you've got to have data that shapes the learner's focus, and the earlier in the learning journey, the better. Of course, these days, most people agree you want something that's manageable, bite-sized. By the way, that's where our name comes from. It's got to be manageable. People are insanely busy. They've got to see the why and the so what of everything.
Yep.
And we do that. We do that, of course. We're designed for social learning. And there's very little evidence for e-learning working because it goes against what we're designed for. So we double down on social classes, live classes with your peers, with experts.
Face-to-face or online?
Both.
Okay.
We're obviously traveling back a bit towards a bit more in-person here and there. But we think there's certain things that we can learn better on screen and certain things that possibly are better in person, physically in person. But live is the key, that you're being met live by people on screen or in the room. So we feel that that's really important, that social element, that social and interactive element. And then the word you use, Dom, trainer, I thought about it myself. How many times have I been in a training program and really kind of wanted to be the trainer? Normally the answer to that is 0 times, Dom. Because you're quite happy with whatever job you've got, and you've got a perfectly professional trainer delivering training, but they're doing their job. So we thought that, building on the language learning analogy, why do people's accents change? Why do we start to use words that other people use? Why do we mirror or mimic other people's behaviors? Normally, it's because we want to be like them. We want to fit in. We respect and admire them. And we wanted to key into that very natural human learning mechanism or adaptation. And so we don't have trainers. We have positive role models for a coaching style of leadership in front of learners. And these are successful business people, like some of your guests, and they're highly qualified executive coaches. And if we put people with that combination in front of busy managers, you've got a chance that they're going to emulate the behavior, they're going to pay attention, and they're going to be interested.
That I like, because two examples of that. One is Top Gun, right? US Navy. You know, they were losing planes too rapidly in the Korean War, unsustainable losses. So they stopped naval operations and they created the Top Gun school. And the teachers in that Top Gun school were their best fighter pilots. And then they rotated everybody in because they said, we need to get the skill from these guys to other people.
Yeah, brilliant.
And the same with the RAF versus the Luftwaffe in the Second World War. The RAF took their best pilots out of the line and put them into training school. Well, because then they would live a bit longer, but also because then you would learn from the people who had real life experience, whereas the Luftwaffe didn't. They just had their trainers. And so all of their best people never got to pass on to the new people what they had learned. And you never build up that knowledge bank.
Yeah. Fantastic anecdotes, Dom. And I think people do talk about inspirational training, but I wonder if those two things don't go together. You know, training is just giving you some facts, some basics, some processes. Whereas inspiration is, you know, when your accent changes, when your behavior changes, when you are literally inspired to experiment, to try something different. And the moment you start getting positive feedback from those experiments, no one needs to tell you to keep doing them, because we're very good at doing more of what works and quickly stopping anything that doesn't work. So for us, that fourth ingredient of positive role models is key. And it's a proven learning mechanism. And then the final one, just for completion, Dom, and I kid you not, and I probably shouldn't say this, but anyway, I won't mention where I did my master's in coaching, but very prestigious and expensive master's in coaching that I got. And it suddenly occurred to me, gosh, this is peculiar. In the huge amount of time that I spent qualifying, there was only one 20-minute opportunity organized by them to practice for real my coaching skills. Now, it you know, and obviously we spend an inordinate amount of time doing lots and lots of real practice, so I mustn't leave people in doubt of that. And it's logged and it's audited. So there is a serious part to this where a lot of practice is needed. But it struck me that was me at a prestigious institution, very motivated to become the best coach I can be. And so I devoted a lot of time to create practice opportunities myself.
Yeah.
But the bit that was created for me was just 20 minutes on the day I'm accredited. Now, obviously, you need hundreds and hundreds of hours to get to that point. The difference with managers, though, is they're insanely busy. They've got no time. And it's questionable whether there is the same level of motivation to practice, because they've got their day job, they've got their individual contributor role, they've got the team, they've got to hire, they've got to deal with the problems. And so it struck me that actually what we don't want them to have more of is knowledge about coaching, which they can find out about via any number of TED Talks or books, amazing books. Mm-hmm. But what's most likely to happen is that they will do no practice. So why don't we double down on solving for that real world issue, whereby you can know all you want about wake surfing, but if you've not been wake surfing, nobody's going to take you seriously. And ultimately, you'll just be a boffin, but you won't be a surfer. And so it is, I think, with coaching skills and managers. What we want for them is to be confident through practice of asking great coaching questions, of listening really well, of being constructive and candid. And so 70% of the time, managers are on our confident coach experience, as we call it. They're basically practicing coaching. initially with peers and with an expert. And then we organize a real world coaching challenge for them, which allows them to have a bit more time in the sandbox. But now it's a bit real, and they get feedback from somebody who they're helping. And all of that is in service of them weaving in the same techniques in their day-to-day interaction with colleagues and team members. So quite a few things that we've built, you'd be surprised needed to be built, but it's surprising how little real practice there is when it comes to changing behaviors at work.
Oh, you see, the thing is, I'm not surprised at all. Because you would think that an area of the organization which would be good at this would be the sales organization. And you would think that sales teams would spend time practicing or training. But most of them spend no time practicing or training at all. And you say, we're going to do some role play. And, people will bring a note from their mother to say they're exempt. They would, and it's just absolutely incredible how little desire there is to get better. It's just amazing.
It's another big topic, Dom, and it's your last guest, if I'm not mistaken, talked about psychological safety.
Yeah,
or one of your recent guests, and I think that a lot of confusion has set in, which gives people more and more license to exempt themselves, to use your word, from the harsh scrutiny of skills development. And we know it's the norm, with kids at drama school, with kids in art school, with kids in, music lessons. They are being observed by an expert practicing their craft, and they're getting live feedback, aren't they? And they're given homework to hone certain bits of their craft so that it's fit for purpose. This feels pretty useful as a construct, right? Yeah. And no one is exempt from this. That's how you learn music, sport, art, any craft. And yet when it comes to, again, it's one of these weird things, Dom, where you turn up for work and all of this common sense is out the window. Now, the reason I brought up psychological safety is I was at one point putting in place a system, just as I think you're suggesting, Dom, whereby you've got to demonstrate and keep practicing your sales skills. Uh-huh. And someone said, yeah, but that's not psychologically safe for me. and I realized that the very important construct of psychological safety has now, at least with this individual, been hijacked to not be judged, to not be evaluated, to not be encouraged to develop and grow. And I froze in the moment thinking, gosh, maybe have I got this wrong? And then I thought, no, damn it, that one's got nothing to do with the other. So I said, oh, hang on, look, I might have misunderstood, but my reading of Amy Edmondson and others' work is that's a culture you create where people learn from mistakes. It's a culture where if somebody's doing something inappropriate, it can be called out. Well, that's the culture where you would practice your sales skills so that when you get it wrong, you can be encouraged to learn from it. So it's almost like, because you have a psychologically safe environment, you would lean into some of these practices. But in this case, it was literally used as an argument to not practice in public. And if that takes hold, I mean,
Oh, look, I have some organizations where honestly, they allow people to come on a video call and not turn on their camera. Right? It's like, so I say, for most of my career, there wasn't a thing called video conferencing. There was audio conferencing, right? And we could just get rid of this video conferencing and we could do it on the phone, but it's shit for everybody, right? You're not going to come in a meeting and wear a balaclava, right? This is a job, right? Fucking turn up, right? There are requirements in this job, right? Like if you're in sales, you're going to have to practice, right? Or you could get a job somewhere else where practicing isn't a requirement. In this company, we require people to come on a video call and turn their video on. And if you don't like it, you go work somewhere else.
I think management, leadership skills, I think it falls into the same category, doesn't it? That there is this low expectation of someone demonstrating competence. You know, whether it's sales, as you mentioned, Dom, or leadership skills, there's a low, the expectation seems to be sadly quite low, that in order to be given more of it, more responsibility, you need to demonstrate some skill in this thing.
I remember I had an employee in a sales team years ago, and she said, why did you not interview me? Why did you not promote me to be sales manager? And I said, well, look, you're a very good salesperson, but you are extremely selfish and you are optimizing for yourself, right? So you are looking at your day and you're saying, I'm driven by commission and I'm going to spend my entire day earning commission. I said, we had this new starter over here. This other person saw that she was new, came in early, supported her, helped her with stuff, stayed late to catch up on her own work because obviously she got some joy out of coaching the new starter. I said, you had exactly that opportunity and you never took it. So we made her sales manager, not you, because you didn't demonstrate any joy to lean in. You're not going to be good at anything unless it gives you joy. I've tried windsurfing. I didn't like it. Really got me I quite like wake surfing. I'll do that even though I'm crap at it. But, you're not going to be great at something that brings you no joy because you're not going to be curious. You're not going to want to get better. And so it's the same with managers. There's so many managers who are just managers because they got promoted or they've been here a long time or they were in the seat or whatever, but they're not very good at it. They shouldn't really be doing it because it's not fair on their team.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, something else that you think the world didn't need any more of is an assessment of someone's ability to lead. And funny.
I think, and that's what you've got that at the front end of your process.
Yeah, exactly. So we looked at what's around, and the other issue with assessments is that they're made so complicated that somebody else needs to explain it to you. And in the insane world of everyone being busy, that's not manageable. If you can't grasp the so what very quickly, you don't have a chance. And so a professor at UCL, University College London, and I sort of rolled up our sleeves and thought, right, what is it that we can measure that will be that will offer manageable insights to managers and leaders who just want to raise their game, or to figure out, to your point, Dom, is leadership the track for me? Or is it rather being an expert? And I'll let other people do the leadership stuff, because actually, if I'm honest, that is not my passion. That is not my wake surfing. But where I can really add value is over here doing analytics or whatever. So we developed what we call the leadership capacity profile, your capacity to lead. And it measures 6 quite kind of intuitive things, like how much do you demonstrate care? How much do you demonstrate candor? How much do you demonstrate curiosity? Those are just 3. There's another 3. And you get a score. And you can get other people's opinion on you, and you can have conversations with people. Hey, I fantasized that I was off the charts on care, candor, and curiosity. But unless I've misread the chart, it looks like you think I'm really, really not at all good at this. So what's going on? And so, so exactly to your point, Dom, if we can have more straightforward ways of grasping what does it mean to be good at leadership, and then we can put people on tailored, context relevant, structured programs to learn the foundations of leadership, and then a more advanced coaching skills program. We're going to set generations of leaders and organizations up for massive success. And in a nutshell, that's what we do. That's what we've built.
Is the assessment available as a standalone thing?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Fab. I'd love to get some clients to do that. I think that would be great.
It's eye-opening. And I mean, I know.
I can see that, I know you were joking about the self-delusional nature of your, but I mean, I have worked for some people who honestly thought that they were brilliant and were awful. So I've worked for some of those self-delusional people who should really have been sole contributors. And then I've worked for other people who I've had other people on my teams who've wanted to be managers, and then they've turned around afterwards and they said, can I just, I thought I was going to enjoy it, but this isn't for me. It's better to know that before you promote them.
Yeah, there's an acid test, and I don't know why this doesn't get more airtime. Well, probably because it's silly, but the acid test is: what if you ask managers if you could get paid the same or slightly more, and have another title with the same social desirability or status, would you continue managing your team? And I obviously don't know the answer to this, but I wonder if we'd have an exodus of people who you've just been talking about, which is brilliant individual contributors that have either been forced down the path of leadership of others because it's the only track to promotion, or they have just not really been given enough candid feedback that this is like pushing water uphill. Why are you doing this?
I still have conversations with clients where I say, your remuneration is broken because the only way to earn more money is to become a manager. And therefore, some people will decide to do that because the status and remuneration goes that way. You need to have, it should be possible to earn more money and be a sole contributor. Your best sales people should earn more than your sales managers. Your best engineers should potentially earn more than your engineering manager, because you want to keep them over there doing engineering, and the manager should get some value out of the job.
Yeah, I think that's right, Dom. And you know what would happen probably? There'd be a bunch of individual contributors who are being misdiagnosed as not leadership material because they're just doing what's asked of them really well.
Yeah.
And if you're doing what's asked of you really well as an individual contributor, there's very little opportunity for you to show how you would lead the team because you're a member of the team. So you might end up, if we applied this leadership capacity concept to an organization, you might end up noticing that a whole bunch of individual contributors who've been potentially written off as not management, not leadership material, suddenly score off the charts in leadership behaviors. And then you'll have, of course, a whole bunch of managers who have ended up in the job accidentally or because it's the only way, who score really low. And again, easy to say, but imagine if we switched them all around.
Yeah.
We'd have much better leadership by people who, as you just said it, Dom, who get fulfillment from orchestrating teamwork, from the psychology of teamwork, from the psychology of humans, motivation, influence, conflict. Imagine somebody who really loves getting everybody into the sweet spot, engineering, harmony rather than discord.
Yeah.
The world of work literally would be transformed. And then if you get those right people, and if you take those people who want to do great windsurfing or wake surfing, and then give them some opportunities to practice safely and then for real, they're going to become skilled. They're going to become
Yeah.
proficient, aren't they? And then they gradually become positive role models within an organization. And then for the first time, the world of management will be like every other profession. So, Dom, this is another one that, I mean, hopefully you'll find this funny, but there's no other craft, profession, whether it's carpentry or coaching, where you don't get all your training up front, right? Makes sense, doesn't it? Imagine surgeons getting their training 20 years in. Imagine your airline pilot says, I've been flying for 20 years and I'm about to go on some pilot training, advanced pilot training. It's way too late. So with management, weirdly, again, something common sense is thrown out the door with whereby somebody who's new to management surely has the lion's share of investment and training. And then as they progress, and maybe some of them end up in the C-suite, surely they are the experts by then, and they need to be giving back and mentoring the earlier generations. And my father-in-law was a pilot at Lufthansa, because you said Luftwaffe earlier. And that's exactly what happens. I mean, he didn't need to tell me because I thought, that's obvious. They do tons of training. and
but
then
they keep having, friends of mine are pilots, they keep having to certify all the time.
Of course, you've got to keep your skills sharp.
And what they have to do is they go in a simulator and they practice a catastrophe, right? Because the catastrophes are very, very rare. And so if you didn't practice them, you wouldn't know what to do when one occurred. I mean, it's not instinctive.
Yeah. So the formula is tried and tested in almost every profession. You have a big push early on where you might do foundational training. You might get qualified, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Then you start real practice. But in order to keep your practice sharp, to stay current, you do some continuous learning.
Yep.
And for whatever reason, Dom, I still struggle to understand how it's come about. Dominant thinking is completely the opposite. You can start with no training, but once you become much, much more senior in the organization, when arguably you're doing less day-to-day leadership of other human beings, you now need lots and lots of support, lots and lots of training, lots of very expensive coaching, and so on and so forth. And I feel quite strongly that if we could stop that for one person at the top of an organization, you could probably do something Rolls-Royce-like for 20, 30 people at the foothills of their career as a manager and a leader. And that's the injustice that I mentioned at the top of the conversation, Dom, that sort of motivates me, and I'm sure lots of other firms that are trying to sort of tackle this orthodoxy.
Yeah.
That people don't bat an eyelid. If you're a senior person and you talk about the kind of leadership development stuff you're benefiting from, they just think, oh, great. And they might even confuse it with a growth mindset. But then if you talk about having first-time managers and you say, oh, no, they don't need any training, people don't bat an eyelid either. So there's something a little bit weird about how we conceive of the challenge of leadership.
Yeah.
So when you start out, it is not challenging. But when you have tons of experience, it is suddenly impossible for you to do it without lots of scaffolding.
I'm glad that you find it reprehensible and are trying to fix it.
Well, I didn't say reprehensible, but it is a problem.
I feel like it's an injustice. It's like it bothers you enough to have gone and been mental enough to start this business. So good.
Yes.
I've got some rapid fire questions for you. You ready?
Go for it, Dom.
Okay. What drives you every day?
The idea that we're going to improve the future of work. Okay.
What's your genius?
Gosh, that's for somebody else to tell me, Dom. But what people have told me, I'm a bit self-confessed genius.
Other than your wife, of course.
I think what I've noticed and what other people have noticed is that I connect dots really quickly, and that's held me in good stead.
What unpopular opinion do you hold?
That managers are leaders and leaders are managers.
Okay. What's the biggest risk you've taken?
Giving up a very well-paid corporate job in pursuit of my entrepreneurial dreams.
Okay. Is it paying off?
To be determined, Dom.
Okay. In happiness, is it paying off in happiness?
Oh, in spades. I would never go back.
Okay. How do you measure success in life?
In life, how present I am in each conversation, I think, is a really good measure of success, because it means that you've got enough bandwidth. You're not super stressed. But that's the daily battle.
Okay. What's the most recent thing you've learned or skill you've acquired?
You know, people talk about dulcet tones. Well, I always thought that was spelled D-U-L-C-I-D, but I've discovered there is a legitimate alternate spelling of the word, which is D-U-L-C-E-T. And I just thought, plink, wow. I'm learning these sorts of things every single day. What was the other part of your question, Dom?
Recent skill you've acquired. That's a thing you've learned.
Yeah.
Have you picked up any skills?
Yes. Recent skill. I have recently abandoned squash and decided that my days of playing squash on tennis courts must come to an end, and I need to learn tennis properly. So I'm working on that.
Very good. What's the worst business advice you've ever received?
It was something along the lines of, you need to hire this role. And that was the thing that I was best at myself. And then luckily somebody else came along who's currently an advisor to Manageable, Louis Warner. And he said, you know what, Farley, why on earth would you substitute yourself, who's best at this thing, for this other thing, for this other person, when they'll always be in your shadow? So I think especially this is obviously more relevant in the earlier stages of an organization's development. But it's I guess the flip of your question is try to keep doing what you're really good at, what you have an edge at, instead of bringing somebody in and then you do less of what you're good at.
I have conversations with people about that all the time. They get that advice, stop selling, or and if you have a real edge, then how do you create a team that allows you to keep doing that thing? Like Steve Jobs, he didn't give up being the guy who manically drove the product innovation inside there. He was the CEO, but it wasn't that he gave that up.
No,
the business, Apple wouldn't have been the business it was if he hadn't carried on doing that.
Yes. So I'm wary now of following formulas and somebody's blueprint. And I think that's invariably interesting perspective, but not necessarily good advice. And I think there's a big difference between good advice and good perspectives. So all these blueprints that have been good for other people, I think might not necessarily work for you. And you've got to sort of work on your own blueprint that leverages your strengths, your passion, your energy, your interests. And so sort of the advice that has sometimes taken me away from my passion, my energy, my strengths, has not been that helpful.
And what books do you recommend people pick up on the topic of being an amazing leader or amazing manager?
Well, one recent one that I really have enjoyed is The Geek Way.
Oh,
exactly.
Andrew McPhee.
The Geek Way I found really illuminating, because it fits well with my sort of orthodox busting approach to business life, and no doubt at all about it fitting well with your approach as well, Dom. And so that's quite recent. It's within the last year or two.
Yeah.
And then going back in time a bit, I'm still really struck by the impact that 9 Lies About Work has had.
Oh yeah.
Marcus
I
Buckingham.
don't have it here because it's over there because I haven't had him on.
Yeah.
But that research that he did with Cisco is fabulous.
Exactly.
Absolutely brilliant.
The best team study, but also lots of things that are actually fairly orthodox or standard in the world of work that he admittedly sometimes a bit sensationally kind of blows up. But there's a whole chapter on ratings and how they don't work. And yet ratings are so common everywhere. And, the science tells us that you get enough ratings, you'll know something about the rater, not the person being rated.
Well, that's why I, his work suggests that things like a 360, where he's talking about this anonymous 360 where, Farley isn't strategic enough.
Yes.
It's like, well, what does that mean? Right. And then, you're supposed to do something with it.
Yes,
It's just ludicrous. So stop doing that. It's like HR theater. It's a waste of time, and find something else to do with your time.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the shocker, isn't it? I think there's this famous example of, Deloitte, they measured how much time they were spending on performance management. And I mean, the mind boggles, but maybe if you've got 400,000 people, it's not so bad. But apparently it was 2 million hours a year. And
well, there's another book called Time, Energy, and Something, which is the three things you've got: time, energy, and talent, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And in there, there's a great study where they look at the PAs of senior people, and they look at when the PA in a senior books a meeting, that they have a meeting, and then they calculate how much work cascades from that meeting. And so they realized that these PAs really had more impact on the profitability of the business than like the procurement teams, because the amount of hours they wasted in meetings that were just totally pointless and could set them up without any intervention. And so just this, like, again, meetings and how it, waste of hours in organizations.
I think it's empowering. Everyone's talking about empowering, but there's something about this whole theme of our conversation, Dom, about, if there were a silver bullet, what is that in organizations? And I've recently been thinking that actually good, highly skilled management.
Yep.
Manifested by managers throughout the organization being really good at what they're doing, which is leading other people to success. If that were a reality in any organization, I bet you almost all the organization's problems will fall away.
I completely agree with you. And I mean, we've had that realization here where I've had teams here at, doing 2-day workshop. And at the end of 2 days, the CEO said, but I think if all of our managers were A players, how many of these things, these problems that we've been trying to fix would disappear? And they just sit there and they go, all of them. Right. And so it's like, okay, job number one. And this happens almost all the time. As a new client leaves 2 days on the farm, their first task in the first 90 days is, let's rate all of our managers and let's have a plan to make all of our managers great managers. And like that, like if that was just the one thing they did, everything else would be faster, easier, quicker, better.
Yeah. And I think that's the power of what you're doing, if I understand it right, Dom, which is creating that catalyst for clear-headed thinking about the actions. And and if you could do that with the group that has the most organizational power and they get it, then you can very quickly get the silver bullet effect throughout your organization through upskilled managers, through more confident and competent managers. So here's to both of us doing more of the above.
Indeed. Farley, thank you very much indeed for coming on today. It's been great having you on.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Dom, and also a good laugh.